So a few years ago, I had a Twilight Zone moment. You've probably had one. I was sitting on a plane, and this person sitting next to me was me. The person sitting right next to me was me. Now, not really, but as I met this person and we talked for a few minutes, I thought, this is me, but back in time, a decade or two, probably 15 years ago. This is me. This is me. And we're talking about all kinds of stuff. But then at one point, he said, "Oh, what's the book you have in your hand?" And I had one of my books in my hand because I was heading to a keynote speech in Texas, and one of the coordinators wanted a book signed for one of their close friends, and I was thinking about what I might write in there because I asked about this person so that I could write something personal in there, and I'm thinking about what should I write, and then I'll sign it and then give it to them when I get to the conference, and me back in time 15 years ago on the plane, Twilight Zone moment, says, "What's the book?" I said, "Oh, it's one of my books." And he said, "No way, let me look at it." He looks at the back and he says, "Oh, you do leadership stuff." I said, "Yeah, for a lot of my life I've been doing leadership stuff." And he said, I've just been promoted twice in the last 18 months, and now I'm in this position where I have a lot of responsibility, and I feel like I'm ready for it, but at the same time, I feel like I'm still a kid. I feel like I'm still the rookie. I feel like I'm still the new guy, and I want to do the right stuff. I want to do the good stuff. I want to do it well. I want to lead well. And he said, what advice do you have for me? Twilight Zone moment. I mean, imagine that you got to give yourself 15 years previous to now. Go back in time. If you could give your younger self a bit of advice about how to lead your life, how to lead other people, about how to lead in your career, about how to lead in your family or in your community, about what advice would you give yourself? And I'm sat there thinking, what do I tell him? What do I tell him? We were talking for a little while. He asked me that question, and then we talked for a while, and I asked him some questions about his career and his life and, why he was traveling. And as he's talking, I kept thinking, like, what do I tell him? What do I tell him? And my mind is racing because I've been involved in this game for so long. This how do you help people become who they're capable of becoming? And I know that most people, they don't need a big 500-page book or thesis. They don't need a year-long management or leadership course or program. They need something that will actually stick, that will actually have a lasting and deep and profound impact. So I kept thinking, like, what do I tell them? Do I give them a 90-minute keynote speech? I was heading to Texas to give a keynote speech. I was going to be on stage for a big conference for an hour, and I think an hour and 20 minutes. Do I give them that? Do I give them the TED Talk version? I don't know if you've ever given a TED Talk, but you got 18 minutes usually, and usually the screens start yelling at you. Time's up, yellow, blinking, and you're done, get off. And the clock is ticking backwards in massive screens in front of you. Do I give them the TED Talk version, the 18-minute version? Do I recommend a book? Do I tell them a little bit about my time in the world-class leadership development program that GE developed? Do I tell them the top 2 or 3 lessons from my mentor in that program? Do I tell them about a person I recently interviewed and this person worked for both Jack Welch and Mother Teresa? And do I tell them my favorite little golden nugget from that conversation? On the topic of GE, do I talk about the 5 pillars that they teach in their leadership program? On the topic of Mother Teresa, do I teach about what my favorite story or my favorite 2 or 3 stories about her life? Because several people that I know had the chance to actually meet her and be deeply affected by her, by things that she said. What do you do? I spent time studying John Wooden. Do I say, well, let me tell you about John Wooden, and do I tell you about when he was in 8th grade and his father gives him this little note card, and there were 7 things on the note card, and for the rest of his life, from the age of 13 till he died, just before he would have turned 100, for 87 years, he read and reread that note card until the note card, the words didn't exist anymore, and he'd take it out, he'd be in practice, he'd be at a game, and he'd be looking at those 7 things. Do I tell him about that? What do you do in the Twilight Zone moment? What do you say? Do I tell him about what I call the mentor's dilemma? I was speaking in San Antonio, and head of training and development for Southwest Airlines, and I had this conversation about what does a mentor do? And there's really a dilemma. There's really two big decisions a mentor has to make. Do I tell him about the mentor's dilemma? Because that would make an impact. Do I tell him about Einstein's hour, what we came across when we were digging into creativity and innovation? Because creativity really is going to matter in my life, in your life, and certainly in his life. Do I tell him about Einstein's hour, Einstein's approach to solving problems? Because that'd be life. Do I tell him about what I call sheepdog leadership? I had a mentor that constantly would remind me of this principle that I came to call sheepdog leadership. Do I tell him about that? Do I tell him about Jerry Allen that I had the chance to spend some time with? Jerry Allen played football for Vince Lombardi and Don Shula. And he told me that they were different coaches, very different coaches. And I asked him a lot of questions. And do I tell him about how Vince Lombardi would keep these players, some of the best in the world, keep them motivated? Because that would make a difference in my Twilight Zone moment, in talking to myself, but 15 years younger. What do I tell him? Do I tell him about having the chance to spend time with Michelle Akers, who was voted the best female soccer player of the 20th century, and the things she told me about culture and about the 10 words she gave me that have completely I can't get her advice out of my head. I think I could write a book just about the time I spent with Michelle. Do I tell him about that? Do I tell him about what I learned from brewing beer and about how to build a culture related to that? How to pursue excellence from that experience? Do I tell him about the time I bumped into Patch Adams in Costa Rica? I was on vacation and he was hitchhiking from town to town to serve people. What do I tell him? What do I tell him? What do I tell him? What do you tell people in your Twilight Zone moments? That's my challenge for you. Not what did I tell this young man, but what would you do in that situation?